Mic on.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles from GearWorks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, here with another episode of What's Your Issue, the People's Weekly Comic Book Review podcast. As always, I am one of your co-hosts, and I have here with me Mr. Stephen Laura. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing good.
So as always, we are here to regale you with tales of the comic books that came out last week, shipping the 31st of October. It was a fifth shipping week, and it really felt like it in some ways, and it didn't feel like it in others. As always, we will run down around about 6 issues in particular in our review segment and go through them in pretty excruciating detail. Then we will talk to you about the best thing that each of us read last week, TBTIRTW, and then we will round that out with we'll round out our coverage of last week's comics by going through our honorable mentions, and then finally brief you up on what we're going to be pulling in 2 days this week so that you know what's coming next podcast. If you didn't know, now you know. This is a review show. It will be full of spoilers. We're not going to shy away from a lot of things. In some cases, even when we're talking about a comic book and a review in detail, we may still not necessarily go into the details of a big reveal that resets the status quo, but we may. So it's up to us. So you should do what you ought to do and do you, and go read the comic books before you sit down and listen to this here podcast. Steven is going to start us off tonight. He has the top of the batting order with Nightwing Magilla Gorilla Special number 1.
Yes, I'm picking that one. I've been liking the hann-barbera and Looney Tune tie-ins with DC, so I've been picking them all up. I've been really enjoying some of them. And some are hits and some are misses. I've been picking them. Generally, they're mostly good. So this one is written by J.M. DeMatteis, and yeah, yeah, and the the other writers Heath Corson. There's 2 writers, and then there's the 2 artists is there's 3 artists. Oh God, is Tom Darnick, Tom Mandrake, and Tom Gourmet. They all have the name Tom. That's funny. So that's pretty much for the artist. So yeah, this issue I really did enjoy. It did give a deep um backstory with Magilla Gorilla, and he. Meanwhile, the issue starts with Nightwing. He's Dick Grayson, and he wants to go visit Magilla Gorilla because apparently he's a famous actor in the DC universe, and Dick Grayson's his biggest fan, and he wants to go have a visit with him. And Magilla Gorilla wanted to speak with Dick Grayson about making the Graysons movie and him starting in it. So he just wants to ask permission for him before he does the go-to. But Magilla's foster father was against the idea of making the movie, and they had a disagreement, and I don't know, Dick Grayson decided to exit himself out while they were arguing because he felt too awkward of them arguing in the house. So he exits, and the next day he finds a news report about Magilla's his foster father had got killed, and people are accusing Magilla Gorilla of killing his foster father. And Magilla Gorilla speaks with Nightwing to uncover he's gonna undercover investigation of to to prove that he did not kill his foster father. That's what the book is about. And he finds a way to prove that he's not the killer. And he finds out is one of Magilla's longtime friends. It was, I think, Daryl is one of the characters. I'm not really too familiar with Magilla Gorilla. I really haven't seen that. I never saw that cartoon, but
I mean, who
I
who who really
picked it
is?
up.
Yeah. So these are, I mean, these Hanna-Barbera cartoons are all things deeply rooted in my childhood. The mashup that started, I don't know. I mean, these things started back. Did they start with Rebirth? Were they kind of at the tail end of New 52?
Yeah, it was on during Rebirth. Yeah, I
Okay.
remember the first one was like Space Ghost with Green Lantern,
Yeah, and there was,
and
and
I
there,
think Booster Gold was with Flintstones. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, really? Oh, I missed that. And there was a Snagglepuss. I think the best one has been the Snagglepuss one, maybe. I personally read the Death Race one or whatever,
Oh,
and
I didn't like that one.
that one was a little. That one was interesting. I actually thought that one was much better. Of course, I don't know if we've talked about it on this show, but I've read a couple of the issues of the Scooby Doo Apocalypse one, which I thought has,
Yeah,
has
I
been really
love it.
good. Yeah.
It's really
So
good.
it's just not kind of what you would expect, and it surprises you when you like it, right? Because you is that
Yeah, it has surprising me.
is,
Uh,
is that kind of the feeling you walked away from this one with? That it, you again.
yeah, I really did like the deep story with Magilla's Gorilla's past and how it means so much to him and how he could relate to Dick Grayson's past. Because Dick Grayson does talk about he does talk about Bruce Wayne as being his father, and he also talks about his actual father. So he talks about his two father figures, and Magilla Gorilla talks about his father's past, and they were both adopted, so they can relate to how it is to be adopted and losing their parents.
Okay, I gotcha. And it's also just kind of weird that this one drops in a week where we seem to be torturing Dick Grayson and Nightwing, and then of course and obviously this is not in continuity, but it's
Yeah,
just
it's
kind
not.
of strange to me that it comes out. I think we'll have the Riddler uh, watch over my shoulder here during the show. Okay, great, cool. What was your review score for this one then?
I would give it an I think a 9.0 out of 10.
Okay.
I actually liked it a lot.
All right, very cool. So the second book in our reviews rundown segment tonight is Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth #1. Um, this is going to be an interesting tale to tell because there were actually two kind of Justice League specials that came out this week that did a mishmash of starting in the title characters book and then moving over to the Justice League, and then gets continued in the special, and then we'll wrap up across another two issues of the title characters book and the Justice League. I guess. Well, actually, the Witching Hour, that was the finale. So
Yeah.
there's some kind of weirdness which we're going to talk through a little bit. In particular, that both of these books appear to be titled the same, but were published structurally different. Which I don't know is a thing. So at any rate, this issue was subtitled simply "Drowned Earth Part 1." Now, okay, so I'll tell you what Scott Snyder said here in a minute. Obviously published by DC. Story by James Tynion IV, and on art you have Howard Porter. Um, Sorry, my screen is trying to get this straightened up. And then letters by Tom Napolitano. So this one, more than anything to me, was marked by kind of an ending that is a little bit strange to me. So the situation is hot on the heels of the last issue of Justice League #10. We launched directly into the story proper. So it's kind of like a start, but the prologue really started back over in Justice League #10. even though this is labeled Drowned Earth number 1. Now, according to Scott Snyder himself on the Twitter account, you should just consider this kind of part 2 of Drowned Earth. So we go right back to the Blood Reef. We pick up right away where we left Mira down in Atlantis. The last person standing, minus Orm, who she releases from his prison. And basically, the Earth is pretty much partially flooded or mostly flooded between Justice League 10 and Aquaman 41. And basically, this issue just drives us further down into the depths of despair, which again felt structurally kind of strange for me. On art, Howard Porter might very well be an acquired taste. I like him, and I have for some time, but the art here sways from what I think is his baseline style to a slightly surreal and stylistic effect that felt a bit disruptive on certain panels. And by that point, I point mostly to things like in the opening pages you have a picture of Arthur Curry being held in his father's arms as his mother abandons he and his dad. It's obviously a very wet scene. It's on Amnesty Bay where he grew up under the lighthouse. But you know, as his mom leaves, his tears well up in his eyes, and Porter draws it such that, I mean, it's this kind of almost, I don't want to say gross, but it's just a really weird effect where it almost looks like the bottom half of his eyes are almost entirely water, but the way it comes off with the coloring is that they look kind of wax-like, and he looks almost like a melting wax figure. It's like a little too syrupy, I guess is one way to say it. It seems like later in the book, as far as storytelling goes, there's a little bit of a blip in the matrix because Arthur, who has been captured by the Ocean Lords, is being shown these portal views of what's going on Earth, and there are like 5 discrete portals, kind of, but 2 of them have Adam Strange in it, and I'm like, is that a mistake? It doesn't seem like when the other 3 like are completely different. It doesn't make sense that 2 of them would be the same. So I felt like that was like a storytelling error in publishing. So it's just kind of weird. Some of the creature work is spectacular and spot on. In particular, some of the creatures in the Ocean Lord throne room. But then there are other things that don't come off as well. Like when Jim Gordon gets turned into a sea creature, he's really diminutive and almost kind of cute, like a tadpole almost, so it doesn't quite work for me. At any rate, there are waivers from the spectacularly beautiful to just a little bit weird and off-putting. But man, there's a scene where Batman projects a hologram to Jim Gordon in Gotham as Gotham is flooding, and look, the last couple of months we've gotten like Tony Daniel and now Howard Porter drawing Batman in the rain. Just put Batman in the rain, and you pretty much have great art. So it's not that any of the art isn't good. It's just that it made me feel like it wasn't quite consistent. And then in particular, where Porter draws Superman, the face feels like it's inconsistent. You know, there's ones where it's chiseled jaw. There's one where the jaw feels like really oversized. There are times where the nose is really big versus very chiseled, so it's just kind of like, I don't know, it comes off a little janky. Overall, my feeling on Howard Porter's art on this was I felt like 90% of it was like a 99 to 100, but then 10% of it was just stylistically skewed such that it kind of jarred me out of my seat, which in my big thing for art in comics, and I'm not that great at judging art, so my main thing is like just don't disrupt me enjoying the story, right? Like you don't have to do anything spectacular, but if you do something that's kind of weird or strange and makes me stop and go, hey, what is that? Then that's what kind of bugs me, because I don't want to be disrupted in the story. On story, I kind of landed in the same place, but not as quite. Slightly different vector. Whereas on art, I predominantly disliked the things that I didn't understand. On story, it was a bit more of kind of like, whoa, is that a car wreck happening over there? And I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Just in terms of it made me kind of tilt my head with some things I didn't understand. Arc-wise, it seems, again, curious that we've gone through 2 issues of setting the story up, all of which present this, like, great woe and despair, like, how are we ever going to win this? And we get more of the same in the Drowned Earth number 1, which I was like, at this point, can't we get, like, a glimpse of, like, the heroism and, like, the light bulb going off that we're going to figure out a way out of this? So it was just a little kind of, it surprised me that the arc was still kind of heading in that direction. I was kind of expecting to see a spark here, the potential end of the thing. You do get Diana showing up at the end, and that is like, man, it is similar to
Yeah.
like Thor showing up in Infinity War. Like there are these like sea monster dudes talking, and they like one of them just gets walloped with their shield, and I'm like, oh, there's like the badass showing up, and it was really awesome. I mean, the only thing that could have made it better would have been for her to do, as Deadpool says, like do the superhero jump down, right, or superhero landing. Um, but I just don't know if I felt like it was enough. Like, why is Diana showing? Why is it Diana that's showing up, and where has she been? Um, Although, except for like the kind of ominous foreboding that you get, because she is one of the superheroes that's willing to kill when the threat calls for it. But then it was still kind of like, well, why is she such an equalizer when Clark has been rolling around and was already angry about losing Metropolis? Um, so then there's this weird hook where um, you kind of the Ocean Lords kind of hint that this whole thing has been about like stripping Arthur of his ocean telepathy, and I'm like, really? That's what this whole thing has been about. So that they could give it to Black Manta, and I'm like, where's the rest of the Legion of Doom? Flash didn't escape. He touches a water monster, but he doesn't turn into a monster. But then when Bruce asks him about it, he kind of dodges the question. Um, so it's just these like little kind of nagging unanswered questions that were in it that just kind of bugged me a bit. Uh, but things that I did love, but by the same token, there were a lot of things to love in this issue on story. The Aquaman Black Manta fight looks gorgeous, and from a storytelling perspective was really sharp. Superman again gets angry that he loses Metropolis and he can't solve that problem, and then he like speeds away to where Bruce has told him the center of the flooding is coming from, which is this big sea monster. And the whole time he's on his way there, like from the moment his eyes like turn red and he goes like, "Tell me where the thing is right now." I'm thinking, come on, man. If we do Superman Supernova here, I'm gonna close the book and walk away. Fortunately, they did not. He actually shows up and does a super clap that like disrupts the monster and like breaks up its water body and splashes it back into the ocean, which I thought that's really cool. And then they have Orb sacrifice himself so that Mira can get away, which is probably the most emotionally impacting thing in the whole book. But then again, then we twist it again at the end where Bruce, who is in the Hall of Justice as it's being submerged, doesn't escape. I mean, he's the central figure kind of leading this whole effort, and he tells McGann to leave and says, I'm not going to leave the totality unguarded. And then he like heads down to like the Hall of Justice basement and locks himself away. And I'm like, did Bruce just remove himself as a piece on the chessboard? Like, what is that? And then I'm thinking, well, maybe what he might be doing is pulling like what he did in the Justice League launch in New 52, which is making some heroic thing that everybody thinks he's off the board, but in reality, he's behind the scenes, like the one, being the one who unravels the whole thing. So I think that was the second book that I read. It was the most engaging story I read probably all of last week. At that point, as I was thinking about the review, I had read Justice League Dark Wonder Woman #1 as well. As I've been saying, this is the exact kind of crisis that requires the Justice League. Big consequences, scary ramifications, potential for a new status quo. I wasn't all that thrilled or interested in what the fallout of Metal was, which was kind of the big thing this year before this. But I am kind of sitting on the edge of my seat, wondering how all this is going to fall out. And it feels like the new status quo might kind of have 5 points of light in it, and I really hope they maintain that. I really hope this whole thing doesn't end and there's just like one sweeping impact. I hope there are changes for Arthur, changes for Diana, changes for Bruce, changes for Atlantis, and Mira seems to be in the wing. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I scored this overall an 8.0 out of 10. So did you read this, Stephen?
Yes, I definitely did read it. I found it way more. I enjoyed it a lot. I did like the emotional moments between Batman losing Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, yeah.
I did like Superman losing Metropolis, and I did like Mira losing Ocean Master, because they all had like deep moments where they were feeling disconnected because those people weren't around with them.
Right.
And it was I like the pretty interesting action with Superman and Flash trying to fight the the sea creature. It was
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah, that was a good action scene. And actually, there's another scene where Flash is just kind of like all over the world. Like, of course,
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
yeah, yeah. And actually, I saw like a couple Justice League characters that I didn't recognize, which again can sometimes always be disruptive. I gave that one a little bit of a pass though. But we did see Mr. Miracle, which I thought. I guess the other thing that was janky from a storytelling perspective, and again, continuity isn't everything, but it is important. We just got done with Titans number 28 last week, and we saw that the Titans like barely escaped with their lives, and that Tempest or Aqualad had taken in low Earth orbit had fallen from one of the enemy spaceships, but they're in a panel in this issue, like clearly none the
Yeah,
worse for wear, and I was like, wait, what? So I don't know, it's a thing, but it was a good issue. So let me.
yeah, I liked it. I gave it like a 9.0 as well.
Okay, very cool.
I did like.
All right, so let's go ahead and roll on to the next one in our review segment. Old Man Hawkeye number 10, An Eye for an Eye, part 10, Blood from Stone, obviously published by Marvel. Writer Ethan Stacks, artist Marco Cicchetto, Andres Mosa on colors, and Joe Caramagna on letters. Beautiful artwork this issue. I want to say I've seen Mark Cicchetto, and I don't know if it's Cicchetto or Cicchetto. I want to say that I saw him either on Punisher, maybe, or maybe some stuff.
Yeah, it was Punisher, the one
Okay.
with Greg Rucka.
Okay, yeah. Man, this thing.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. So sometime in the future, all the heroes, or most of them rather, were killed by a cabal led by the Red Skull, including villains like Baron Zemo, Doom, Magneto. Turns out he's evil in the future after all. And others in Hawkeye, having been one of the fewest to survive, is now going blind. He wants to balance the scales and deliver some justice one more time before he completely loses his sight, so he sets out on the road for revenge. At the point in the story here, in part number 10, he's reconnected with Hawkeye Kate, and the two of them are hunting down Moonstone in the frozen tundra of Canada. I have no idea who Moonstone is, but whatever. On story, this is the tail of the tape on this issue is I was much more in tune with the art than I was with the story on this one. My expectations may have been skewed a bit by listening to another podcast that sang the praises of Ethan Sacks. So maybe I was expecting a lot from this drop-in. But I really didn't truck too much with the story. To me, it feels like the same old Hawkeye, which with another character, as I mentioned last week with Old Lady Harley, that would normally bother me. However, it's Hawkeye, who's kind of like a Han Solo in the Marvel Universe, and for those characters, they're largely supposed to stay the same. So I kind of gave that one a pass. It's the one thing you can rely on in that world, and he's kind of an anchor character. In the opening sequence, they fight a Sentinel, which has been reprogrammed. They then meet up with a bunch of fanaticists that worship Moonstone. And I kept wanting to call Moonstone Moon Dragon, partially because I've been reading the Defenders Epic Collection from like the 80s, a big, thick trade that I'm reading right now. Then we get to see with Bullseye. What's really weird with the Bullseye thing is he kills some guards who I think he's supposed to be like part of their group, but he just kills them nonchalantly, like for no reason. And I don't get that, and maybe it's because we're trying to paint Bullseye as this ruthless killer who kills, wantonly. It doesn't matter whose side he's on. But it just kind of, I was kind of floating along with the story very smoothly, and then all of a sudden you get that, and then again it caused me to kind of pull up my heels and go, what the hell? So then they encounter Moonstone, and she tells them about how basically Skull and Zemo wrote her out of the spoils when they were divvying up the U.S. after they had killed all the superheroes. So then afterwards, she and Zemo went back and forth trying to kill each other. But I'm like, so at any rate, there's a pretty neat action sequence after Moonstone kills a couple of her followers. They seem to worship her because she can release them from their mutated, horrible lives in the toxic, radioactive wasteland by killing them. And then Hawkeye blows her up, which I thought was pretty cool. But then we cut to a scene with Zemo being shown that his minions have finally solved that pesky super soldier formula problem, which for decades no one has solved in the Marvel Universe, although it's like every other issue that's the plot point. And then we end with Hawkeye apparently setting out to find Zemo. the story was pretty well constructed, but I'm a little wary of the gender storyline in 2018, just in terms of, well, let me first say that's not to say that it's not an important issue that shouldn't be discussed. I'm fully on board with that. I will be voting accordingly tomorrow. But I mean, just this is a fictional story, and it's post-apocalyptic, and you get all of like this new kind of crazy stuff of wonder, but then you root it in this problem that we're dealing with today. And I'm like, really, at the end of the day, like the story is that like there were 5 men and 1 woman, and they kind of cut the woman out of divvying up the loot right at the end. And I'm kind of like, I don't know. It felt off tenor to me, and I felt like it was kind of marginalizing Kate and Moonstone. Instead of making their story something more unique and important, instead of just another kind of woman-scorned tale. Uh, Chichetto on art, amazing. Last week I talked about how, and I forget what issue we were talking about. I guess we were talking about Old Lady Harley. That when an artist is drawing a post-apocalyptic landscape, it is sometimes hard to make something that stands out. But Chichetto just nails it. Shading of there's some great blur effects that he puts in. And I shouldn't say just Chichetto, but it was Chichetto working with Mosa as well, who does a great job in flattening a lot of the drawings and then applying the color. Fight choreography was on point, which is always impressive when it's melee and martial arts characters because you really have to nail it. There's a great page and panel set with Bullseye on a snowmobile up top with a bunch of motion blur, and then an overhead picture of the Moonstone compound below with tons of texture. Again, just taking these post-apocalyptic scenes and making them really great. At the end of the day, though, I only gave this issue 7.0 out of 10. At the end of the day, I'm glad that I looked at this book from an art standpoint, but I don't know that I felt anything from reading the story. We talk about whether or not you and I talk about whether or not we're glad we read a book in our stack, or whether we felt like, I don't know that I'm, all that happy that I spent, 20 to 30 minutes reading that. And I'm not disappointed that I took the time to read it, and I'm not angry. There are some books that I read, like Black Panther #4, that I'm outright angry. But I just came away from this not feeling really super happy. Like the story was just kind of ho hum. There were not points of high humor in this, maybe a couple. Which, like, if you're gonna have Hawkeye, isn't that kind of what you want? Is him, cracking wise throughout. So it wasn't like Big Trouble in Little China funny, or even Nick Spencer's Secret Avengers funny. But it's also not somber and serious and tragic like The Walking Dead or that Denzel movie, whatever, Ezekiel or Isaiah or whatever he was. I felt like it should have landed on one of those two ends. So it just kind of didn't make me feel anything, and it just kind of landed flat. I kind of wanted more of a sense of high adventure, and so maybe I needed to feel like this was more of a challenge for the Hawkeyes. I didn't really feel like they were particularly challenged chasing down Moonstone. Like I would have liked seeing them maybe get a little bloody, and have more of a visceral sense of them being in mortal danger, particularly in order to like make me really despise Moonstone as a villain, since I'm not familiar with her. That all being said, as I was writing my talking points up, I guess I came away feeling a little bit happier after I thought about it a little more. But at the end of the day, like I said, I was just kind of, oh well, I kind of expected more from this being the big deal that it's supposed to be. So I am sure that you read this. So what were your feelings?
Yeah, I read this. I read this series regularly, so I
Right.
know what's going on, and
Okay.
I gave it an 8.0 because I did like. I don't know, Hawkeye. The reason why he's not as humorous as he is in the regular in the in the main Marvel universe is because he's feels like a deep darkness of himself. He feel like he's losing himself as a person, and he's becoming more cold-hearted, and it's because he worked with the Thunderbolts and he finds out they betray him and kill the Avengers behind his back, and he feels betrayed, and I don't know, he wants to kill all the Thunderbolts that were involved in killing the Avengers, and yeah, he's on the path of revenge, and is changing him to a dark, cold-hearted person instead of a light-hearted person, and he feels uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I guess that's something you have to get like when you string a few of them together, because I didn't feel any of that coming off this particular issue, but it is what it is. So you are continuing to read the What If issues, which seem like they
Yes.
are either a gold coin or a rusty nail. So
Yes,
which
I
one was this
agree.
issue?
This one was is a what if magic became the source supreme #1.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's let me see. The talents are the writers Leah Williams
Mic off.
and the artist is Philippi and Andrean, and the colorist is Chris O'Halloran, and the letterist is Clayton Coles. That's pretty much it. Um, so yeah, this story picks up where magic escapes the demon world. This is like I think she was like around teenage years. How she escapes the demon. I think it's limbo. I'm not so sure, but yeah, she escapes the demon world, and Doctor Strange is he's observing New York City, and he sees her getting attacked by some man, and she uses some type of demon magic to deflect the man that's attacking her, and Doctor Strange is like amazed by her strong power, and he goes to talk to her and tries to like train her under his wing to become the Sorcerer Supreme, and she struggles with it. She doesn't think she's worthy of it. She doesn't think she's a good person because she has a demon inside of her, and she thinks that she can't control her, but Doctor Strange finds a way to convince her to control it and be a person of the greater good. And they also fight this other demon villain that put magic into the demon world and put a demon inside of her. But the demon that's inside of her wants to do good. It just doesn't know how to balance himself between her and magic. That him being possession of inside of her body, there's a disruption in balance between the two souls, I guess I can say. But so yeah, they defeat the demon, and magic decides to become their next Sorcerer Supreme, and just goes on her adventures. And yeah, that's about it. I did I did really enjoy this story because I did like how Doctor Strange was teaching magic how to become a better person, and you do see her struggling with the ability to create something. And I did like that they put motion and being creative into the comic book. I did like that that was mostly the center theme of the book, and it was interesting to see magic going through that struggle, and she finally creates the demon staff for herself, and she was really happy about that, and it changes her as a better person. So I did like it. It was pretty interesting. I would give it a 8.5 out of 10. And the art wasn't all like great, but it was enough to able to explain the story in detail. It didn't really disrupt the story from being bad or anything.
Mic on.
All
So
right,
yeah.
cool. Cool, man. Why don't you go ahead and talk to me about Infinity Wars Iron Hammer #2? And my first question for you, because you noted that this is the final issue in the
Yeah.
agenda. So, is there really an Infinity thing going on, like in Marvel, that's
Yeah,
like in
it's just that
continuity?
there is these are just like spin-off or tie-ins to
Okay.
of Infinity War. It's just
So they take place now, or are they going back and they're like
there's no clear indication of when it takes place because in Infinity Wars the Gomorrah has rewritten the whole world, and that is it's like the none of the comic books are in that interaction. Like no one's in the new world in any of the other books. So it's
Okay.
like,
So this is all a thing to capitalize on the Infinity War movie that's not really
yeah, that's why I
impacting
don't like.
Marvel now.
I'm not really liking Infinity Wars because it's very off-centered and none of the comics are interacting with it at all.
So let me ask you, just
It's
out of
like very non-existent.
just before you get into, so let me ask you, why are you? So you've got Spider-Geddon going on right now, which is
Yes.
great. Like Spider-Geddon is everywhere. I mean, I mean, there's numerous books out. Like you could definitely occupy almost your entire stack time just tracking Spider-Geddon. So why do you feel there's a need to consume this if it's that off-putting? Is there something like, and I know, look, sometimes I get it, and this is what I'm trying to kind of scratch at to see if this is the case. There are sometimes like we feel obligated to read a thing, and so we read it even though we don't really like it, and I'm trying to feel you out to see if that's what's going on here.
Well, I'm only picking them up because I am interested in the combining the two characters into one character thing. To me, it's like a what if.
Okay,
And
all right,
I really like that alternate Earth stuff, and I've always
right,
interested in that, and I want to see what makes it different than the main universe.
okay, all right, okay.
And
We'll have at it, man. Let's talk to me about all the details of Iron Hammer #2.
I did I didn't like the Soldier Supreme because it was way too much of the same. But I've been liking Iron
Mic
Hammer
off.
because it was very different. It didn't feel like they're only making certain tweaks to the story. They're actually completely changing things, and I did like that a lot. So yeah, the Iron Hammer is more it. This issue explains the origin with um. It's a combination of it's this character's name is Stark Odison. It's a combination of Tony Stark and Thor Odison, and you see him talking with his father, and they have the Warriors 3, but it's a different Warriors 3. It's like you see Pepper Potts merge with Sif, and you see Rhodey merge with I think one of the uh, it was one of the Warriors 3. It was one of the male ones, and they also had Ezekiel Stain as Loki. Like he was combined with Loki. Yeah. So it was interesting to see them talking with Odin.
Mic
He's
on.
combined with Howard Stark.
Right, and so this is Al
Yeah.
Ewing writing this, I guess, while
Yeah.
he's also doing
Oh, I
Immortal
should have
Hulk.
said it.
So okay,
Is the writer was Al Ewing and the artist was Roman Romana
okay,
Rosanas.
yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty much it. There's no letters or colors in the list.
okay,
Yeah, so yeah, it's a pretty interesting
Mic
story.
off.
You see how Odin abandons Tony's I mean Stark Odison into the to Earth because he's very arrogant and he doesn't like Ezekiel Stain for being human. It's all about being a god and he should be worthy. He was very I guess selfish of himself because he only cared about being a god rather than being human, and Ezekiel Stain was more human than him, and he was very jealous of Odin praising him instead of Odin's son. And so yeah, it was abandoned to Earth, and I don't know and he Odin's memory gets completely erased, and he become as he's raised on Earth, he becomes a new man, and he becomes more human than Ezekiel Stain. We find out later in the story because we also run into Malekith. It's like he's like a mixture of Malekith and the Mandarin, and I mean, he fights off Odison, and he eventually wins. But he also finds out that Stain was working with Malekith in order to like get rid of Odin's son. He wants to kill him, and he he noticed that Stain didn't he did know that he did capture Odin and the Warriors 3, and Odin's son was betrayed. He felt hurt because he didn't think that Stain will go against him and go out of his way to capture them with Malekith. And it was it was a pretty interesting story. I did notice that later on that Tony Stark, what's it, Tony Stark? Stark Odinson falls in love with Hel is Madam Hel, because it's Madam Hydra combined with Hela. So yeah, and it's a lot to contain, but it's a pretty interesting story to
Mic
me,
on.
and I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10.
Okay. All right. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Rounding out our review segment is gonna be us talking through the details of Justice League Dark Wonder Woman: The Witching Hour #1. Subtitled The Witching Hour Finale, which kind of took me off guard when I opened the page, and I was like, wait, but Drowned Earth is kind of structurally the same, but it's just part 1, but this is at its finale already, and I didn't feel like there was as much work up to get here. But obviously published by DC, another one written by James Tynion IV, so I guess Snyder did his thing on his. I forget who's writing Wonder Woman, but and then I guess Tynion kind of took the merger between the Justice League books and the individual hero titles. Really weird on artists. Jesus Marino, Fernando Blanco, and Miguel Mendoza. I will say this didn't feel like 3 artists. It felt like stylistically the same throughout, and it kind of made me wonder, question whether or not these 3 artists, as they are credited, actually chunked the issue up into 3 parts. I wonder if it was more like one of them was an inker. But I'm not sure. Colors by the great Romulo Fajardo Jr. Thank goodness for him, because he definitely kind of pulls this thing together. This book, again, is even weirder to me than Drowned Earth Part 1 was, just in terms of some disruptive things that I didn't expect and didn't understand. Overall, I felt like the book wound up falling a bit flat with me. I had less of a good time reading it than I did Justice League Aquaman #1. That could have been a different story if this had come out in a different week instead of it coming out last week, where kind of organically I felt obligated. Like when I tried to settle down on how I felt about Justice League Wonder Woman #1, invariably I had to compare it to Justice League Aquaman #1, and I was like, if you guys had shipped these different weeks, right, I wouldn't be competing them down against each other. But at any rate, so the situation is in Justice League Aquaman in Justice League Dark Wonder Woman #1, we pick up right after the events of Wonder Woman #57, which, if we recall, I was also not a huge fan of. We get the Justice League Dark kind of getting all lathered up to fight Hecate, and Diana is inside in her own head, meeting with the other personas of Hecate, 2 young women, and they tell Diana the whole history of Hecate's, the ancient evil who's her mirror, how Hecate herself developed into the crone when she felt she was spurned, and then how she was first feared by the gods and then invited to join the Greek gods as part of their family, and then eventually rejected, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's part of my reason I bounce off of this issue. It is very much a soap opera-y take on all of this eons of history, which they kind of unfortunately convey to you kind of like an encyclopedia, which is part of one of the problems. So the art is actually pretty good, despite 3 artists. I probably give a lot of that credit to Fajardo. And I mentioned I wonder if the duties were really split up, in the 3 parts. Overall, the art lands squarely in the middle of what we observed with Porter. It's more stylistically consistent, and there are fewer weird choices. In fact, it's pretty devoid of anything that caused me to kind of stop and go, hey, wait a minute, over the artistic storytelling. That being said, when Porter was on Justice League Aquaman #1, which he was for the vast majority of that book, it just really kind of blows this book out of the water. there's a few takeaways here, like in terms of the art and things that were done well. There's some great creature art in the opening pages, and in one of the pages, there's this great creature that's kind of like partially like a monkey with like multiple rows of multiple vertical eyes stacked in 2 rows. He's got some big scythe for a weapon. These kind of bony wings. It's great creature work. And then we never see that creature again. We literally see him on one portrait, like a full page thing, and then the Justice League Dark kind of runs away, and that creature is never a threat anymore. Which, again, from a janky storytelling perspective, I'm like, wait, what the heck? Where did that thing go? It's just kind of weird. There's some design stuff that I'm not super pleased with here. Overall, again, the de-aging of Constantine and Zatanna, particularly Zatanna with kind of the goofy millennial ponytail, was just kind of off-putting to me. And then one thing that they really cranked up huge in this issue that, again, kind of caused me to bounce off of it is not only have they put Wonder Woman in the movie costume, but when you listen to the lines, like, it's very clear to me that this is Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I mean, that's how she is written. And one of the giveaways was there's this point where we're looking at her outstretched hand and her fingernails are immaculately manicured, and I'm like, I don't know if like the Savage Amazon would have like perfect nails, and she's being possessed by an otherworldly demon basically. So I don't know. There is one great panel in here where you have the Justice League Dark kind of all posseed up with Zatanna, giving her St. Crispin's Day speech, getting them all lathered up for battle. And that panel looks great, because I don't know that we get a lot of kind of big splash pages that feel like posters with all the Justice League Dark standing there together. But man, this book is wordy. I mean, it reads like Homer's Odyssey. It's almost a Talking Heads issue, except instead of it being conveyed to you through a bunch of character conversation, it's like literally straight exposition. Like, it's boxes written by, voiced by a disembodied narrator, and it's pages and pages and pages and pages of this stuff, which you would expect to see like in a issue number 1 sometimes. If a writer's a slow burn writer, then sometimes they do that, but this is the finale, and it's just like pages and pages and pages of text of stuff that's not happening right now. Like, it's all about stuff that's happened in the past, and I'm like, this is a 36-page oversized issue, and I feel like half of it was exposition. Constantine is in the book, but I don't think he speaks the whole time, and again, it feels like it's wasted. The whole book really is pretty much a Zatanna story, with the other half of it being about Diana. Again, I go back to Diana being Gal Gadot. She constantly refers to Zatanna as sister, and I'm like, I didn't know Diana and Zatanna were like that close. I mean, I guess you could do that, but it was just a little overly, the way it was written. So if anybody dropped into this, then I didn't drop in, right? I've read some of the books leading up to this. I just felt there was enough room with 36 pages for them to do something more than just all of the blatant exposition that we got. At the end of the day, I scored this a 6.0 out of 10. My summaries in the end, I'm not sure that I was really happy about reading this book this week. It was a lot of filler. I felt like not a lot happened. Like, kind of like a fight started, and then the Justice League Dark ran away and sat in another dimension. Diana's in another dimension. She's talking to the other 2 faces of Hecate, and then everybody shows up, and there's not even really a big fight. So it just felt like nothing happened. I'm not really pleased about Diana. And then at the end of the whole thing, also, Diana loses all of her magic. And I'm like, why did we make this really big deal about putting Wonder Woman in the Justice League Dark and having her be part of that cast, and then just kind of wipe away any of the consequence and plus-ups that may have occurred throughout this adventure? So at any rate, I'm not really sure where they go from here. I don't really know if Wonder Woman has a place in Justice League Dark. It seems like she doesn't. But and like I said, unless they take her in a specific direction, like chasing down magic, which I don't feel like they're going to do. So I don't know, man. Did you read this issue?
Yeah, I had a different experience. I liked it a lot. I
Okay.
gave it a 9.5 out of 10. I just liked the mythology of how Hecate how she was like the creator of magic and people abused her. It kind of felt like, I don't know, it did tell like the story of what women's rights were in this
It it kind of felt
in
like
the
it kind of
America.
it kind of felt like
Yeah.
Old Man Hawkeye all over again, right? Which is and again, I get it, and it's important, but it's important, and we're getting it all the time. And when it's there's there there's a way to do it. And I'll just say, I'm a big fan of the iFanboy podcast. I've actually, since we started doing this, I actually have to delay listening to them because I don't want to be influenced by anything they say. So I never listen to their podcast until
I
after we've
understand you.
recorded this. But Josh Flanagan says a thing on that show where he talks about like when a thing is pushed in your face and you're beaten over the head with it, like you don't appreciate it, and it makes you feel like the writer feels like you're dumb and you have to have it spelled out for you. But when it's subtle and it just happens natively or organically, it's more of an effective and creative thing. And I just felt like maybe that's what we were getting in Old Man Hawkeye a bit, and that's what we got in Justice League Dark, where again, I don't feel like Diana Prince, like her, like the whole thing about Wonder Woman is that she is above that, and and she doesn't play, right? She doesn't so I don't
I
know.
did like that at the end that she tried to give Hecate a second chance, but Hecate didn't want the second chance. She just wanted to do what she wanted to
Right.
do. And I did like that Wonder Woman understood Hecate, but for some reason Hecate still was against her.
Right.
And it was pretty interesting to see that Wonder Woman tried to understand her as a human being, but
Right.
she see if she can talk to her way out of this, and she learned that you can't talk her. She couldn't talk her way out of it, and she decides to use the Upside Down Man to kill Hecate. And I did like that because Wonder Woman tried to be better, be better at being a hero. She tried to talk her way out of things, try to
Right.
talk with peace, and it didn't work. She decided, like, what? I'm just gonna kill you. Forget it. You didn't want to comply. I'm just gonna kill your
Right.
ass. And
Right.
I thought that was pretty badass.
Right. But then I also didn't really, again with the landing flat, I also didn't really like the fact that at the end of the day this was all about Cersei duping everyone so that she would be like the fifth vessel who wound up with all of the power of Hecate. So, and of course that will be a thing that has to
Oh,
we have to boomerang back around on to get that story at some point in the future.
by the way, Constantine's been DH since the beginning of New 52. I'm not sure you noticed that.
I didn't feel in New 52 he was that de like to me he looks like, I mean, when I say de-aged, so I mean I agree with you that neither of them feel as old as the actor that we get on the television show.
Yeah, he's not as old as him.
But I felt like New 52 Constantine was kind of squarely in his like mid to late 30s, which is kind of how he feels comfortable to me. But this guy in Justice League Dark feels like he's like in his 20s, and I'm like, that's just too
Maybe the
much.
artist just draws him as a pretty boy.
And
I noticed that.
Yeah,
He looks very
yeah,
handsome.
yeah, right. Okay, let's go ahead and burn down the rest of this house here. And for me, so that wraps up our review segment. For me, the best thing that I read last week, we've already talked about Justice League Aquaman Drown Earth #1. Again, there were a couple nits that I struggled to kind of swallow down, but at the end of the day, Howard Porter's art is still great. 90% of that book. James Tynion the Fourth's story is still great. It's just they kind of left I don't know, some dust bunnies on the floor that I got distracted by, but still the best thing that I read last week. What about you, Stephen? What was the best thing you read this week?
The best thing I read was Old Man Logan #50. It was the final issue. Was written by Ed Bryson, and the artist was Arabiam Robertson.
Okay.
And there's another artist who's Neil Edwards.
Okay. Now
So,
I thought maybe he wasn't on Old Man Logan. I guess I've been thinking that Charles Soule had written a lot because he wrapped up or did Death of Wolverine. And I thought,
No, he's not on. He was not on Old Man Logan at
okay,
all.
okay, all right,
He only did the Return of Wolverine and the Death of Wolverine. That was
okay,
it.
all right, gotcha.
Yeah.
So, anything
Yeah.
particular that you want to point out in this issue?
I did. I gave it a 10 because I did like how Wolverine was
Mic off.
fighting for the humans, and I did like that he killed off Maestro and he was struggling with himself. With he did end up using the Regenix to cure himself, but he ends up getting killed at the end, and it does lead up to like the next chapter of Old Man Logan's story, which is gonna be Dead Man Logan, which is a 12 limited
Mic
series.
on.
so
It's gonna be a 12-issue limited series of his final story in the 616 universe.
okay, are we done with Old Man Logan? Is this part of like extermination and everything, like putting everything back in
It's not
place?
done yet because we still have to read. I mean, there's whoever. I mean, if people have been following up with Old Man Logan, they have to read Dead Man Logan to see what happens
Okay.
with himself.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. But you never know. Every once in a while, when I've got a book that goes away, something slips in. I wound up putting Titans on my recurring pull list after reading that last issue. So you never know when you could be surprised. I had no honorable mentions this week. Nothing out of the things that I read was an 8.0 or above, other than uh, Justice League Aquaman Drowner is number one. How about you? Any that you wound up having honorable mentions that you would have scored an 8.0 or above, outside of the ones that you've already talked about?
I do have as my honorable mentions are Injustice versus Massive Universe number
Mic off.
4, Doom Patrol number 12, X-Men Black, Emma Frost number 1, and it's Faith Dreamside number 2, Superman Top Cat special number 1, and Deathstroke Yogi Bear special number 1.
Mic
That's
on.
pretty much it.
Okay, so you're really digging the DC Hanna-Barbera
Yeah.
crossover stuff, apparently.
Yeah, and the one that really stand out to me was I liked X-Men Black Emma Frost because it does lead up to her becoming the Black King, and I did like
Okay,
the Hanna-Barbera's the specials because they were more of like off the wall, ridiculous humor.
right, right.
It wasn't serious stories, those two.
Okay, all right, very cool. What are you pulling next week, man, so we can let the viewers know what they can expect us to be talking about potentially?
I'm pulling next week is The Walking Dead, no, 180, number
Mic
185,
off.
Kick-Ass number 9, Doctor Strange number 7, Death of Inhumans number 5, which I'm gonna be reviewing as the final issue. Spider Getting number 3 and Sideways Annual number 1.
Mic on.
So now, who is the creator on Sideways? That's not a
Uh they keep changing the writer like every issue.
okay. I
I
thought
know it's Dan DiDio, but it's like he has like a co-writer every week and it's a
okay,
different co-writer.
gotcha. Gotcha. So kind of a little like Joss Whedon does on like the Buffy things, where he's the
Yeah.
architect of the whole thing, but he's actually enlists somebody else's
And
help
I
to actually.
understand why Dan DiDio has co-writers because he's the boss of DC
Right.
and he can't always be the main writer for the series.
Right. Right. So for me, I'm gonna be pulling Batman number 58, Deadpool number 6, Immortal Hulk number 8, Justice League number 11, Star Wars number 56, and then uh, as a matter of pulling things from your pull list, I'm also going to read Sideways Annual number 1, and I am the dice fell in such a way that I'm also going to read Spider-Geddon number 3. So I guess I will just swallow that bitter pill. And actually, it'll be interesting to see if it actually improves. Because normally I wouldn't have pulled that, but since you're pulling it, I will join you in a read through of
Yeah, I
that.
forgot to mention I'm gonna be picking up Justice League 11 as well and Star Wars 56.
Okay.
And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, pretty standard weekend. What's weird for me is there's no tier 2, no tier 3 publishers next week after Millennium, The Girl Who Danced with Death has wrapped up from Titan Comics. So, and I'm not sure when another slot is going to shake free on my pull list, but we will see how that goes. So, Steven, anything else that you want to talk about this week?
No, not really. That's it.
All right. So once again, that was the week that was in comics for the books shipping 31 October 2018. My name has been Agasicles Stamus. My co-host has been Mr. Stephen Laura. And on behalf of the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, Gearworks.com, and the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, that's going to do it for us this week. Until next time, happy hunting, take care, and read the comics that you love. That's going to do it for us. We are out of here. What's your issue?
Right. Here.